Good Friday afternoon, everyone. I'm meteorologist Addison Green here at KHOU based in Houston, and we are diving in towards your Atlantic tropical update. Just want to give you a quick update of what's going on out there across the tropics out there on this Friday, whereas we make our way in towards the holiday weekend ahead. We are definitely keeping our eyes on those beaches because that's where a lot of people are going to be trying to celebrate and enjoy the Labor Day holiday coming up on Monday. But we do have the latest information for you right here, where we have Hurricane Larry that's forecast to become our third major hurricane this season as it starts to make its way open across the open waters of the Atlantic Ocean. But in doing so, it's becoming what we call in the weather community a fish storm. That's the only thing it's impacting. The fish out there, maybe some boats as well, pushing across central portions of the Atlantic Ocean, but most of those boats know better and steer away from those storm systems. But it may brush past Bermuda as we head in towards September 8th. That's this coming Wednesday, where it may make a glancing blow, hopefully not a direct landfall, although some of the models do hint that it is possible. There are two other tropical waves we are talking about right here in this video. One is by the African continent, and another one is sitting in the West Caribbean Sea. First things first, we dive in towards the Central Atlantic, where we do have Larry right here looking healthier as time has gone on. You can clearly see on the visible imagery we have this nice feathering effect going on from those outer bands, indicating that the storm system is breathing and strengthening nicely. There's very little wind shear around it, shearing off those cloud tops. Also, the system is looking rather symmetrical, where we're seeing the similar form on the top and the side, as well as you're seeing on the bottom and the left side. So that's indicating that it is not really interacting with much wind shear up aloft as well. And that's indicative of a strengthening tropical storm. If we had a lot of wind shear going on, you'd be seeing one side being kind of jagged or kind of like off cutoff right there, and the other side be kind of like looking more blown off with those cloud tops, pushed further towards the east, for instance, right there. But as we watch, you can see that feathering going on across the northwestern portion of the storm system as well, where it is running into a little bit of some drier air right here. That's where we can clearly see those bands coming on in of cloud tops, but overall, there's not any dry air getting sucked in towards that center of the system, so it's a nice closed, tight, low pressure system developing right there, and it's indicative of us seeing also a strengthening storm. But as we zoom on down and across in our visible satellite imagery, you can certainly see a little bit of an eye feature trying to form. Also, another sign of a strengthening tropical system. And you can see right here around that center portion of what would be that eye wall, a little bit of some of those higher cloud tops, and we getting that deep convection going on, getting that thermal energy really getting pumped up into the system. And as it's venting itself out, this is, after all, a nice vertically stacked engine. We have that potential of that continued convection going on around that center of circulation. The more it continues to do that, the more we get the system deepening in that low pressure and getting that eye to clear out nicely from top to bottom. That's usually when you have a big time major hurricane. And like we did see recently, Hurricane Ida, before it made landfall, it was starting to show off a nice clear cut eye. And of course, we all know what happened in southeastern portions of Louisiana. As we zoom on out right here, talking about the upper level winds and the water vapor imagery, we are seeing right here, we have Larry pushing towards the northwesterly direction, and it is, like I said before, not running into too much wind shear up aloft. But up ahead of it, there is some wind shear right there, and we're watching those upper level winds starting to diverge, starting to split off in various directions to the northwest and to the northeast. Reason why they're doing so, well, one of the reasons why I should say, is an upper area of low pressure sitting just across the northern sections of the Caribbean Sea in towards the southwestern sections of the Atlantic Ocean. Not too far away to the north and east, we have a big area of high pressure, helping to bring some upper level winds from the northeast, and then you can see right there a little bit of a convergence going on in between the two of them. That's where we will generally be seeing these two upper level pressure systems helping to steer Larry through this area over time, helping to pull it away from the lesser Antilles right here, the leeward islands of the Caribbean, as well as the greater Antilles from Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, which is an island nation that shares its property with Haiti and Dominican Republic, as well as Cuba. Several areas that have gotten hit over the past several tropical storms paths, for instance, like Fred, that came through bringing a lot of rain across the area a couple of weeks ago. But we're going to be getting the chance for seeing Larry stay out to sea going in towards this vicinity right there, and if it can survive that journey, then it threatens potentially getting in towards where Bermuda is, over towards the north and west. Well, as we zip on down right here, looking towards the visible satellite imagery and the wind field, we're trying to see if those winds are symmetrical, rather circular, around that center area of circulation, indicative of a strengthening system out across the open waters of the Atlantic Ocean. And the yellow highlighted area here is tropical storm force winds in excess of 39 miles per hour, and those typically are the biggest stretch of winds going on. And then eventually you get towards the higher tropical storm force winds in excess of 58 miles per hour. Once you get above 74 miles per hour, you're now dealing with hurricane force winds, and there is that hurricane force wind gust right there going on towards the center of circulation. But notice the bulk of this activity is displaced slightly away from the center, from where that low pressure is developing, that eye right there. So we are seeing just a touch lopsided, although this data right here, this layer, may be slightly outdated from the latest visible satellite imagery, so it's just maybe like 1 or 2 frames off. But nonetheless, we are starting to see circulation, or see nice general circular path right there, starting to become more filled over time. And that is where we do see that potential of Larry, that's a Category 1 hurricane with 90-mile-per-hour winds, getting stronger over time. Let's look at the various spaghetti plots first, the various computer models, like the GFS model, that's the American model, the Euro model, as well as several other models out there that all of us meteorologists use to scan these systems, as well as just scan the weather day-to-day across much of the world. You can see the general trajectory, one's bringing towards a northwesterly direction, and then afterwards they kind of a little bit of a confusion amongst themselves, not really agreeing on the same point of where the system will be going. But that's bound to happen. You are talking several days out, and there's a lot of data that gets ingested into these models for them to calculate where we see these systems go. So there's going to be some variables out there that they're anticipating, one more so than the other. But there's the island nation of Bermuda, so several computer model runs want to have to bring that system, the center of the system, in towards Bermuda. But a whole lot more want to bring it just to the east, so glancing below and pushing it up in towards the northern sections of the Atlantic Ocean. That's a very good scenario if that does actually pan out, because we don't want any land mass anywhere where there's people, of course, living to get impacted by these powerful and dangerous systems. But sometimes Mother Nature, unfortunately, wants to guide them our direction. That's where we have to make sure everyone is prepared for dealing with a strengthening storm system or very powerful storm system upon landfall. But the official track from the National Hurricane Center, which takes a lot of those computer models into their calculations, has that system strengthening towards a Category 3. That's a major hurricane by the time we get towards Saturday in the midday hours. Then afterwards, it continues to strengthen, going from a Category 3 towards a 4, and that's with winds in excess of 131 sustained miles per hour. It won't be maintaining that strength for long, as eventually we get in towards Tuesday, and it'll start to weaken little by little as it runs in towards a little bit of some undesirable situations over and towards this vicinity. Maybe a little bit of some wind shear, maybe a little bit of some Saharan dust around, and also running towards some slightly cooler waters. But there'll be a few factors putting that system down a notch from a Category 4 towards a Category 3. But nonetheless, that forecast cone of uncertainty still points in the general direction that Bermuda is right there. So we'll have to keep our eyes on that forecast as time goes on. So I mentioned the wind shear, and that's when we're talking about as you're going up aloft from the surface to upper portions of the atmosphere, if the winds are increasing with forward speed and strength. And if you're seeing light winds at the surface and then really strong winds up aloft, you're dealing with that strong wind shear, and that's what these tropical systems do not like. And as we move forward in time, we can see eventually it'll be going in towards an area that's going to be seen decreasing wind shear that allows for tropical development. So as it makes its journey from its current location, going through the central portions of the Atlantic, we can see there's an area of high pressure towards its north and east, and there's an area of low pressure towards its west. And both of those have kind of like parted the Red Sea, so to speak, kind of like opened the door. So we see an area right here, a very low wind shear, and that's where it will maintain that Category 4 status. Although I would not be surprised if it gets a little bit stronger. Several of the models have hinted at this thing really getting beefed up towards potentially a strong Category 4. And of course, if you get winds in excess of 157 sustained miles per hour, that's a Category 5. But a strong Category 4 and a weak Category 5, man, there's not too much of a difference right there. You're dealing with a very powerful storm system. But thankfully, like I said before, it's staying out in the open waters of the Atlantic. As we move forward in time and throughout much of next week, we can take a look at that wind shear and the upper level winds aloft, 250 millibars. That's 34,000 feet in altitude, pretty much the same level that commercial jetliner flies, and we can see that system eventually runs into some wind shear coming in from an easterly direction. Well, there's a big area of high pressure towards its north and east, and that system will try to help to curve it back out to sea, but also that's brighter colors right there going from green to yellow to red that indicates stronger winds up aloft, and as they're running into the system, then maybe knocking off some of those cloud tops, keeping the system from really breathing nicely, hence getting the chance for it to weaken as it's starting to approach Bermuda, which is right there, that little black like dot on the map right there. Bermuda is very small compared to, like, the United States. That's why you can see much more of a landmass right there. But as we talk about wind shear and vertically stacked engines, this is what one example looks like for a normal hurricane wind flow. Picture the front of your engine right here at the surface. This is your exhaust tailpipe. You want to have a nice clear pathway from engine to tailpipe and allowing those fumes to vent out, so to speak. When you're dealing with a lot of wind shear, it's like taking that whole system and maybe putting a banana tailpipe, so to speak. You're really not getting that chance for it to allow it to vent nicely up aloft, and as a result, you're really disrupting that proper flow of air coming in from the surface, moving up aloft, and those systems will kind of like stagnate, kind of like suffocate, as well as they're trying to strengthen and develop across that area. As we move forward in time, we'll eventually be keeping our eyes on a system out there across the open waters of the Gulf of Mexico. And as we can see, we do have that system potentially drifting up across sections of the southeast, moving up across the east coast right there. And I'll get to those details in just a moment. But first things first, let's go ahead and dive into what we do have going on in terms of those tropical waves. So here we have, that's Larry, that's pathway right there. You can see that current location of the system. And further to the east, we have a tropical wave that was coming in off the African continent. And you can see it kind of like, kind of fizzle out, just kind of, runs into some really a lot of difficulties over there across the eastern sections of the Atlantic Ocean right there. So that's why that chance has dropped down from 20% about a day or so ago down to 0% chance of development. But here's that tropical wave I was mentioning. We just saw a little snippet of that video right there. I was just showing you that computer model run. It does have a 30% chance of development in the next 2 to 5 days. Right now it's sitting just off the coastal areas of Belize, and I think it just kind of like pinwheeled within the last few frames or so, moving in across central sections of Central America right there. If it can survive going over this area right here, going across from Belize in through the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, if it can survive that, then it has a chance to move in towards those open and very warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. The southern end of the Gulf of Mexico is the Bay of Campeche, and that's where we do have a chance for seeing potential strengthening and developing of that wave. Next name on the list would be Mindy, if it does happen to become a named storm system. To put it in perspective, we had Grace make its way in towards the Yucatan Peninsula, and then once it made landfall, it started to weaken and then started to move across the Yucatan Peninsula. Once it got in towards the Bay of Campeche, it re-strengthened, reorganized, became a tropical storm, a strong tropical storm, I may add, Category 1 hurricane, and then before it made landfall near Veracruz, Mexico, it beefed itself up towards a Category 3. So those open waters that are very warm can easily ramp up a system in terms of its strength and, unfortunately, its intensity before it makes a potential landfall. So that little wave I was showing you, that's Tropical Wave Invest 91L. That's the official designation from the National Hurricane Center as they are keeping their eyes on it. And these are the various computer plots in terms of where that system may go. Well, we do see that it does want to go in towards the Bay of Campeche, but does it survive past that point? And some of the computer models do have it surviving that journey and making its way northward, but a lot of discrepancies in terms of where eventually it would go. One of the models, right there in towards the Houston metro area after doing a little kind of like do-si-do around the western portion of the Caribbean. Remember, that's just one model run. Another model wants to bring it in towards, unfortunately, very hard hit southeast Louisiana, where of course we did see Ida move on in several days ago. And one of them wants to make it go right in towards the bay and then shoot off towards the Tampa, St. Petersburg area in Florida. And another one wants to go right in there towards northern Mexico. So there's a lot of options right there for the system to eventually go down in terms of a pathway. But once it does enter those open waters of the Bay of Campeche and the western Gulf of Mexico, we have some really warm waters at the surface. In fact, right here in that highlighted polygon, that's where we have sea surface temperatures of 88 to 91 degrees. To put it into perspective, we saw that same scenario over across the lower sections of Louisiana and through Mississippi, and that's where Ida went through. That really warm bathwater type temperature was the trend all across this region. And as the system moved on in across those shallow waters and eventually the shallow marshlands of southeast Louisiana, it really did beef itself up and kept that strength after going several hours of being on land after its initial landfall around noon on Sunday. So we did see that water gradually cool down as we had the system move on in. Now temperatures are generally in the low to mid 80s, but nonetheless not as hot as they are currently across the western section of the Caribbean. So let's dive back in towards that model, shall we, where we do see that potential system curving on up, and at least one model on the GFS wants to bring it in towards southeast Louisiana and eventually drifting up across the Panhandle, and then possibly, after going through the Panhandle of Florida, moving on in across the open waters just offshore of the Carolinas, and that's where it could potentially strengthen and develop. Remember, the next name on the list would be Mindy, if it does happen to be named. But afterwards, we go in towards several other names that could potentially be checked off, and they could easily be checked off as we are entering the heart of the hurricane season going through this month of September. So Mindy is next up on the list. After that is Nicholas, and then we have Odette, Peter, Rose, Sam, Teresa, Victor, and Wanda, if we happen to get that far. And then if we go past this list, there is no more Greek list that's used anymore. That list was retired last year after another record-breaking season. Instead, we'll go towards a supplemental list of alphabetical names coming on and restarting the list of a name storm system. But we hope that you do not get anywhere close to that level of activity, especially the likes of which we saw last year's break, the all-time record for the amount of named storms that did pop up, which was previously set back in 2005. That's the year that rewrote the books pretty much in terms of how we were talking about hurricanes and tracking tropical systems in general. But there's that little mountaintop right there. That is mid-September that we do see peak activity with a lot of tropical waves coming on in off the African continent and moving on in across the open waters of the Atlantic Ocean, the Caribbean Sea, and the Gulf of Mexico. And then eventually over time, things do cool down as we start to see a lot of unfavorable conditions coming around and we don't get too many tropical waves developing. If you have any questions, thoughts, concerns, comments, feel free to hit me up on Twitter, Instagram, as well as Facebook. I'll be happy to answer your questions. And we'll be coming back later on this evening. Check right here at KHOU's 11's YouTube channel. Chief Meteorologist David Paul will have another update, and the rest of the weather team will have updates as we go through the holiday weekend ahead. Take care.